Dubey sir, now you can unmute and speak about introduction of Rajan sir.
Okay. So, good morning, friends. It's nice to be back again this Sunday. And our speaker this morning is Mr. Rajan Chandy. So, first of all, I want to extend a very warm welcome to Mr. Chandy for being with us. And I also want to thank him for accepting our invitation to speak before this group. Mr. Chandy has spoken before this group earlier also, so I'm not going to give a very long introduction to him. Mr. Chandy has been associated with the Rishi Valley School for close to 3 years. He is deeply interested in Krishnaji's teachings and also in the teachings of Buddha and Ramana Maharshi. This morning, Mr. Chandy is going to talk to us on compassion. Compassion has been very uh, detailed. There has been a very detailed description and talks on compassion in both Krishnaji's teachings and also in Buddhist philosophy. So with these words, I want to welcome Mr. Chandy once again and will request him to please unmute and then begin your talk. And as Rajan, you can speak for about anywhere between 40 to 50 minutes or 60 minutes, leaving about 25-30 minutes for the people to pass their comments or ask questions and so on. Yes, Mr. Rajan Chandy.
Okay, thank you very much, Dubey. I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Yeah, you are.
One small request is to keep your videos on if you can, because I prefer speaking to people I can see than otherwise. So if you can keep your audios on, please do so. And not your audios, I mean your videos on.
Videos, yes.
Yeah. So thank you very much for calling me. I'm happy to be able to share some of my thoughts on compassion with you. It's not going to be a very structured talk, I'm afraid, but I'll just share some things and maybe then we can have a discussion. And many things come up in a discussion, so it's good to have a longer discussion and maybe shorter talk. But anyway, let's see how it goes. Yeah, compassion is a very vast and profound subject. And I was wondering how to enter it and to start off. So I thought I'll start with an incident from my own life. I don't know, I've told other people about it. I don't know if I've mentioned it here before. But I had a friend. This was this happened in the 80s when I was living in Germany. And this friend had come down from India. We had been activists together in the 70s, and he was a close friend of mine. Unfortunately, he was suffering from what we now call bipolar. In those days, we called it manic depression, where your mood swings from one extreme to the other. So when he came to Germany, he was in a kind of a manic phase. He wanted to make a film on Nicaragua. And he was going to various funding agencies and kind of troubling them a lot. They knew me, so they called me in Heidelberg to come and sort of pacify him and take him away. So I went to Bonn, and from there we went to Stuttgart. And then finally I persuaded him, after some days of being with him, to come away with me to Heidelberg. So in Stuttgart, we went to the station, and you know, these German trains, they are very punctual. They say they leave at 4:53, they leave at 4:53 and not 4:54. So we were kind of rushing to the station to get the train. And suddenly I looked back and he was not with me. So I mentally kind of said, where the hell is he? And went back a little, and I saw him kneeling on the ground. And then I looked closer, and he was stooping over somebody who had fallen. This person was what in Germany they call a penner, a tramp. You know, people who just go around, they don't have any income, they just get some money from the state, and they drink a lot and so on. So he had fallen. He said, I said, what are you doing, Paul? His name was Paul. We'll miss the train, come fast and all. He said, no, no, Rajan, come here. So I also went and looked closer, and this man had fallen, and he probably hit his head on the ground, and an ugly lump was forming on his head and growing, in fact. So I said, Paul, we'll miss the train, we can't, this thing. He looked at me and said, how can we leave him here? How can we leave him just like that? Then, I realized, yeah, we can't. And what do you do in such a case? You take him to the police, railways police on the in the station. I was very reluctant to do all this and to get mixed up with the police. I was a foreign student in Germany, and we always have problems with visas and things like this. So, and I knew that, if something happens to him, something more serious, then we would be in trouble, or at least I would be in trouble, because we have to establish that we just found him on the thing and we didn't actually hit him or anything like that. So anyway, we took him to the police, and sure enough, they wanted to question us. So I just said, look, we brought him here. Why would we bring him here if we did anything? And we have a train to catch. So they let us go. But as soon as the train came into the Heidelberg station, police were waiting for us. And then they questioned us for a long time. Now I'm narrating this incident to point out that in that moment, my friend Paul felt for that person who had fallen. And this feeling for somebody, their suffering, their pain, is what we generally call compassion. So his mind was in a much more compassionate state than mine. Even when I saw this person and saw that, he had fallen and he had an ugly injury and all that, it's not that I didn't feel anything, but the kind of hesitation of getting involved with the police and taking him and perhaps a police case and all that made me very reluctant to do anything for him. I did feel something. I did feel, yes, we can't just leave him. And Paul said, you can't just leave him there. We can't just leave him there. I felt, yes, he's right. And therefore I did something. But on my own, I'm certain I'd have just walked past like the hundreds of other passengers who are walking past and not even throwing a glance at this person. Okay. So what is compassion? Compassion is this feeling for others, especially when they are suffering. The ability to feel for or feel with. Actually, the word compassion is a Latin word. It comes from com, which means with, and passion here means feeling, emotion. Okay. So feeling with others, their suffering. And the first level is having this feeling. The second level is at least a wish that their suffering will end. And a third and a more potent level of compassion is actually undertaking to do something to bring this suffering to an end. Now, I'm sure all of us have felt compassion at different times in our lives. But usually our feeling of compassion arises for people who are close to us. Our own children, parents, siblings, relatives, friends. If any one of them is suffering, then it's quite likely that we will feel along with them. And we will also definitely wish that their suffering comes to an end. We may even do something, and if it's our own child and so on, we may actually do a lot to bring this suffering to an end. So all of us have experienced compassion, but as I said, this kind of compassion is limited to our own immediate circle. If it's someone outside this circle, very often we may feel something. I'm sure we've all had the experience of walking on the road and seeing some beggar or sometimes an animal suffering greatly. And we definitely feel something at that moment, but generally we don't want to get involved or do anything. So, compassion rarely extends to people who we are beings, living beings with whom we have no immediate connection. If it's someone who we don't like, quite often it's not compassion which arises in our mind, but a feeling of subtle satisfaction that the other person is suffering. This is not a nice feeling. Feeling happy that somebody else is suffering and something bad has happened to somebody or they're in a difficult situation. But I'm afraid that kind of thing does arise in our mind from time to time. If the person who is suffering is a person we dislike or actively regard as an enemy. So our compassion, though we experience it, and when we experience it, it is genuine, is limited. Now, the kind of compassion which I am going to talk about is not this limited kind of compassion, but what the Buddhists call Mahakaruna, or great compassion. And what Krishnaji often refers to in his talks, he doesn't use the word Mahakaruna or great compassion, but he speaks about compassion. But when he speaks about compassion, he means a compassion for all beings, or at least for all human beings. When the Buddha uses the word compassion or great compassion, he means it for all living beings, whether they are human or not human. Krishnaji also uses it in a very general sense, but generally he restricts himself to all human beings and talks about the need for compassion, the need for love. Now, one thing we need to look at, because we all have had these experiences ourselves of feeling this compassion, is to ask ourselves a question: which is a better state of mind? A state of mind which is compassionate, or a state of mind which closes itself and doesn't want to feel for others? Like in the situation I described, my friend Paul had the mind of compassion. I was having the mind of trying to shut out this suffering of the other person because I was preoccupied with myself. What will happen to me if I get involved? So generally, one of the great obstacles to developing compassion for all beings, all human beings, is this preoccupation with oneself. The more preoccupied with oneself a person is, the more closed that person becomes, the more incapable that person becomes to actually experience compassion. But it is the loving mind and the compassionate mind, which both Krishnaji and the Buddha said, okay, which leads to peace, which leads to emancipation. The other mind, which is just focused on itself, what we can call the self-cherishing mind, leads to suffering. This is very clearly stated by the Lord Buddha and implicit in a lot of things which Krishnaji has said. So we need to test this in our own experience. It's not enough that the Buddha said it or Krishnaji said it or anyone else said it. We have to look at our own experience and see which state of mind is a better state of mind. It may appear that a compassionate state of mind actually is one where more get into difficulties. Like in this case, the same incident, because of compassion we helped that person, but we were questioned by the police and so on, but they finally let us off. And luckily for us, nothing happened to that person. If he had passed away or something, it would have been a much more serious situation. But he recovered, and so nothing much happened to us. So, but which is the better state of mind, Paul's or mine? And in our own experience, we have to see there are times when we have been compassionate, when we have helped somebody, okay, or at least wanted to help somebody. And there are times when we have been completely self-centered and not cared about the suffering of somebody around us. Now, this self-centered mind is a very narrow mind and is incapable of bringing true peace. Whereas a compassionate mind, though it may appear to create some trouble here and there for us, is a courageous mind. Is a mind which is willing to take on suffering to be able to benefit each others. If you think of examples from global history, we can think of people like Gandhiji, like Nelson Mandela. Okay. We can think of many examples like this of people who have willingly endured difficulties in order to bring happiness and peace and stability and joy in other people's lives. Now, when the Buddha talks about universal compassion, he is talking about a compassion which embraces all beings and is not dependent on the behavior of that being. Whether that person, let's, for the timing, just talk about human beings, whether that person is friendly towards us or indifferent to us, or even has animosity towards us. The Buddha is saying that universal compassion will embrace all these three different types of people equally. No distinction will be made in our minds between he's my friend, I don't know this chap, she's my enemy. Okay, so I help the first and ignore the other two. He is talking, and as I said, Krishnaji also implicitly says this many a time, of the need to feel for all beings, whatever our connection with them may be or may not be at the present moment, and to at least have in our minds the desire, the wish that their suffering ends. There are many cases, most cases, where we can't do anything practically. But having that desire, that wish to end the suffering of all beings is a very noble state of mind. When it reaches a high level of development, this state of mind is what we call the mind of a bodhisattva in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition. So the bodhisattva has this very strong desire to end the suffering of all beings all over, irrespective of who or what they are. And he, in the Buddhist tradition at least, he undertakes, therefore, to attain the state of a Buddha in order to be able to maximally help all beings. So he strives towards Buddhahood not for himself, but for the sake of others. Now, why is this a beneficial state of mind? The Buddhist teachings tell us that all actions which are done for the sake of just oneself lead to suffering. And on the other hand, all actions which are done for the sake of others lead to emancipation, to liberation, to enlightenment. Therefore, if our action, the intention is very important in any action that we do. And if the intention is just myself, and I think that is the way I will become happy, then actually I will be led to suffering, both in the immediate term and in the long term. Just take an example to make this clearer. Supposing I'm the eldest son of a joint family, many siblings, and my father dies. Now I can, I'm doing my college and so on and so forth. I can continue. I can perhaps finish, get a good job, and secure my own position. Or the alternative may be that I give up my studies, take up a job, earn money, and see that all my siblings are educated. The first is a self-centered type of action. The second is an action which has the interests of all my siblings at heart. Now, you can easily see that the second type of action, which has interest of the whole family at heart, not just my interest, is more beneficial, not only to the others, but to myself. Because if I follow the self-centered type of action, then yes, I may get a good degree, a very good job, and so on and so forth, but I will be isolated. Whereas if I follow the second type, I will have a deep bond and connection with all my siblings. So you can think of 100 such scenarios where property has to be divided and so on and so forth, and I try to grab a large part of the property for myself and ignore my siblings. Or I'm the eldest son and I deal fairly. I even give up some of my interests for the sake of others. Now, again, in the second case, my action will give me more immediate satisfaction, and it will lead to good results in the long run. Why will it give me more immediate satisfaction? Because if I try to cheat my siblings and get the large part of myself, I might succeed, but my mind won't be at peace. Whenever I think of my siblings or whenever I meet them, there will be an uneasiness in my mind. Whereas if I have shared the property generously, I'm at peace. I go to bed and sleep peacefully. When I meet my siblings, there's joy on their side, my side. Okay, so compassionate action is far superior to self-centered action. And yet, despite this, most of the world, including all of us, always acting in a self-centered manner. This happens at the level of the individual, it happens at the level of entire families, it happens at the level of a nation. Just to briefly go into the last, we have a climate change crisis, which all of you are aware of. The only way to solve it is by cooperation among nations. If each nation says, you reduce your pollution first, then we will reduce ours, the net result will be that we go on polluting the atmosphere. If a nation is generous enough to say, okay, I'll cut down my pollution, please, you also try and do yours. But my cutting down is unconditional. Then there may be a solution. But no nation will do this, because every nation wants to serve itself first. And therefore, there is an unresolvable crisis in the world. So likewise, self-centered action is at the root of all kinds of suffering, from the individual to smaller community, to society at large, to the world economy. Okay, this self-centered action is, or self-cherishing action, is the great demon, if you like, the real enemy. Whereas acting for others is the best thing we could do. Now, the question is, what prevents us from doing this? If we look at the reasons why we go into self-centered or self-cherishing kind of actions, is because we think there is some strong self, me, who is radically different from others. And my idea is to protect and cherish myself, even if necessary at the expense of others. So it is this belief in, or kind of almost subconscious grasping and holding at the notion of self, which is at the root of self-cherishing, which is again at the root of all this kind of destructive behavior. Now, what do the Buddhists say? They have different reasons for why you should cherish others. One very simple reason is, actually, there is no difference between you and anyone else. At the most fundamental level, and Buddhists mean all beings, not just human beings. Okay. But as I said, for convenience sake, we'll talk about human beings. And they say there is no difference between me and anyone else. What is it that they mean? How can they make an assertion like this? They are saying that, look, what do you want? What do I want? I want happiness, a feeling of well-being. I don't want suffering of any kind, from a common cold up. I always try to avoid suffering. I always try to get a better and better sense of well-being as far as I can. But that is what everyone is doing. Just as I don't want suffering, I don't want a cold, I don't want to wait in the queue, and so on, so does every other person. Nobody wants that. So where is the difference between me and somebody else? There is none. And if it's a good thing that my suffering comes to an end and I get a state of well-being, it is equally a good thing if somebody else's suffering comes to an end and they attain a state of well-being. In fact, there is no difference. Now you may object and say, look, I am I and he is he. My suffering is my concern. His suffering is not my concern. But again, this is contingent on the existence of an I. An I that is completely distinct from another person, a they, a he, a she, it. Okay. Now, precisely this is what the Buddhists say is an illusion. There is no such I. There is no such self which is radically distinct from others. And any attempt to protect the interests of that self, even as I said earlier, if it means harming others, is a completely mistaken and counterproductive way of living. Take a family again. Supposing the husband corners everything for himself. He makes sure that he has his drinks, his entertainment, and so on, and the others suffer. What will be the state of that family? What will be the quality of life in that family? He may have his drinks, he may have his entertainment or whatever he wants, okay? And he's powerful enough to get it. But there'll be a lot of resentment against him by his wife, by his children, by others. Yeah? And this resentment is not something he can shut out. He is in the matrix of that family. All the resentment that is going on within the family is bound to affect him. So he thinks by his drink, his entertainment and so on, he'll get peace of mind. He won't. He'll always have to be asserting himself against others. He will not be in a peaceable relationship with them. So the idea of an independent I, independent of his wife, children, and so on, is an illusion. If you extend the argument, the idea of an independent nation, independent of other nations, is an illusion. America may want to destroy China. But if China is destroyed, the American economy will be hit, and vice versa. China may want to destroy America. But if the American economy is hit, there is interdependence. And this interdependence is the truth of the world. From the small relations of an individual to another individual, to the entire global economy, to man and the environment, there also there is interdependence. If we do whatever we feel like and think it's okay, no, because the environment gets affected. When the environment gets affected, we get affected. However much money I have now, if I'm living in Delhi, I won't have a healthy life. I may have air conditioners, air purifiers, any kind of thing, but the entire atmosphere is very polluted. Whenever I step out, I'm breathing that polluted air. Even in the shelter of my home with my air conditioners, I'm still breathing polluted air. Okay. So interdependence means that there is no inherently existent, independent, autonomous self. It means that the welfare of others influences me, has an impact on me, just like my welfare has an impact on others. The sense of peace and well-being of others will impact me if they are discontented, okay, if they are unhappy, then there's no way I can create a small island for myself where I'm happy. You know, recently we had some readings from Krishnaji. We had a session in school, and I'm sorry, I wanted to bring one of those with me. But there he talks about the growing world crisis and how it is very foolish to think that you can find a isolated niche for yourself. He said the crisis may be in Mexico or somewhere outside, but it is at your door. To think otherwise is being very short-sighted. So this interdependence, which is the nature of things, all things, yeah, this interdependence negates the idea of an autonomous self. So when he say it's, you know, I don't care about the sufferings of others. I am just interested in that I don't suffer, that I am secure, that I have a good house and so on and so forth. That is being very short-sighted. That is doomed to failure because it goes against the nature of things. If the very nature of all life, all existence is interdependence, then the attempt to secure myself, irrespective of all the things and people and beings around me, is fundamentally mistaken, fundamentally flawed. But it is this fundamental flaw which is working in our minds and in the minds of all other people, and leading to the kind of crisis that we talk about, whether it's at a national level and so on. Therefore, when the Buddhists say there's no difference between you and others, they're saying they put their finger on a very fundamental truth. So our way of being, where we continuously and habitually make a distinction between ourselves and others, prioritizing ourselves, using others for ourselves, for our own sakes, for promoting ourselves. And I'm not giving examples. You can think from, what you see around you, your own lives, of hundreds of such examples, where one prioritizes oneself and others become instruments for one's own well-being or pleasure or happiness and so on. This is fundamentally flawed, and because of the interdependence and the fact that all beings are attempting to end suffering for themselves and to attain well-being for themselves, and that there is no difference between me and others, this is the reason why universal compassion is the highest form of living. The more you are able to embrace all beings, at least in your thought, as I said, practically some refugee who is trying to get to Europe and dies on some boat because they won't let him in and so on. There's nothing much we can do about it in practical terms. But do we at least feel for these things? Our feeling has to be universal. Our action may be limited, will be limited. But the more we are able to feel for all beings, their suffering, the richer our lives are. Okay, as I said, I don't want to talk too much. Maybe in a discussion, we can bring out various aspects of what I've said. So it's 45 minutes, so I'll kind of stop now and leave the floor open to discussion.
Thank you, Rajan.
Yeah.
You have placed it very well. I just want to add that compassion is not out of pity. And Krishna has very rightly said in a book which I'm sure many of us have read it, The Whole Movement of Life is Learning. He says, I'll just quote, compassion is not the doing of charitable acts or social reform. It is free from sentiment, romanticism, and emotional enthusiasm. It is as strong as death. It is like a great rock, immovable in the midst of confusion, misery, and anxiety. Without this compassion, no new culture or society can come into being. Compassion and intelligence walk together. They are not separate. Compassion acts through intelligence. It can never act through the intellect. Compassion is the essence of the wholeness of life. I remember in one of the talks in Rajghat, it's not a quote, so I'll just say verbatim. I mean, it carries the meaning of what Krishna said. He said, to have compassion means to have passion for all things, not just between two people, but for all human beings, for everything on the earth. So I think he puts a very strong base. But this is also clear that it can't come from thinking. It can't you can't practice to become compassionate. So what is it that brings compassion in the human being? This is what I would like the participants to say and comment on, and also ask questions from Rajan. So we'll start with Harshad Bhai. Yes, sir. Please unmute yourself.
Yes. Are you able to listen?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Dubey and Rajan. What Dubey said just now, I feel that is quite, I completely agree that compassion cannot be cultivated by our will. And compassion is a byproduct of freedom, freedom from the self and suffering. So only when there is a freedom from all these problems which bother us, like anger, fear, jealousy, loneliness, and also the freedom from the self. That is what real love is. And out of that, compassion is a byproduct. It is just like a tree which gives shade, it gives fruits, it gives shelter to the birds, and it gives oxygen. And the tree doesn't expect anything from, and it is for anybody, just like a flower which gives its fragrance to anybody who comes nearby. So compassion is a byproduct of love and freedom. And love and freedom are same. So um, and I would like to say, since Rajan indicated something about Buddha, that Buddha had that compassion only after he got enlightenment. And then one time when he was meditating alone, and one man had come to kill Buddha, and that man tried many times to raise the weapon to kill Buddha, but he was not able to do that. And then Buddha opened his eyes, he saw the man, and then Buddha was very compassionate and asked him, how did he come, who sent him here? And then Buddha says, now you don't go back to the same way as you have come. Go to your village or house, other way, and then you take your mother and go out of this kingdom. And Buddha was very compassionate to this person because Buddha was very intelligent too. He found out that if the man went back to the same way, that man will be killed by the king people or Ajasatru's people. So Buddha was compassionate even to the person who had come to kill him. And he was also very intelligent, Buddha. So intelligence and love and all this are same because when there is a freedom from this self, then compassion comes and then a person helps without expecting anything. So that is what I have to say right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Harshad Parekh. Yes, Mr. Rajendran, if you can put on your video, yes, that's good.
Yes, it's
Please
on,
go
sir.
ahead. Please go
Oh,
ahead.
thank you, Dubey ji and Rajan sir. Just it's very nice listening to your talk. I have just two questions, a very simple question. First question is, compassion, whether compassion leads to suffering? Suppose we share the sufferings of others, we also suffer. First question. Second question, Krishnaji has often said, love, compassion, intelligence. Even understanding of what he says does not belong to you. It is outside your body, your brain. So my question is, then is it cosmic or universal or just like Amazon cloud storage? How will we access it? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, Rajan, you want to respond?
Yeah, shall I respond now? Or?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, just one or two things. I don't know if I got all the questions, but maybe to respond to all three of you about compassion. When you say you cannot cultivate compassion, it depends what one means by cultivating. I think one of you said that you can't cultivate compassion through the will. That I agree. You can't cultivate compassion through the will. However, when we look at things, when we look at what are the faults of self-cherishing, what are the greatness of cherishing others, when we look, then what we are doing is that kind of self-cherishing mind at that moment is in abeyance, and a more compassionate mind comes into being. So this continuous and repeated looking at the reasons why the way we live our lives is actually counterproductive. Because as I was saying, the way we live our lives is based on a notion of self and self-cherishing. And most of the time, this is an automatic pilot. We don't think about it. But we go on and then we do things which we regret, we suffer and so on. Now, when somebody speaks about this, whether it's Buddha or Krishnaji or someone, and we are listening, okay, we are suddenly getting an insight into what is wrong with the way we are living our life. That insight clears away some of our habitual tendencies. But these habitual tendencies are deeply rooted. Okay, they'll reassert themselves, which is why most of us keep listening. We've had this discussion before. Some people, one listening may be enough. With others, they may have to repeatedly listen. Listen, by listen, I include read Krishnaji's teachings or the Buddha's teachings, or listen to somebody talking about them, or listen to Krishnaji himself. This continuous listening is what I mean by cultivating. And I feel that this for most people, this continued listening is actually necessary. We don't get it in the first shot. Most of us, there are exceptions, but most of us need to continuously listen. Otherwise, we'll keep returning to our habitual self-centered tendencies. So when we listen continuously to this, we are actually cultivating this. We are changing our minds. Our minds are growing. So that is what I call cultivation of compassion. Secondly, whether compassion leads to suffering. In a certain sense, we may feel that is the case. If I concern myself about the sufferings of somebody else there and so on, I have enough sufferings of my own, etc. It may appear that I'm adding a burden on myself. But there's a paradox here. People who are very concerned about others and their suffering end up being less worried about their own suffering. Again, I'll take a simple example. Head of a family who's very concerned about his siblings and his wife and children and their siblings, wives, children, and so on. And he is constantly concerned about that. He's no longer preoccupied with his own personal suffering. So, again, if you look at people like Nelson Mandela and all these people, they seem to get a certain kind of courage from their compassion. An ability to face suffering, their own and others. And in some sense, a very positive state of mind. Okay. So I don't think that being compassionate will increase your suffering. I think being compassionate or living a compassionate kind of life will actually reduce your worries and anxieties. Because all our worries and anxieties arise from self-centeredness. It will also may help you to relativize your problems. You may think you have huge problems, but when you're looking at the problems of others and so on, you'll realize your problems are actually pretty minor. and that others have much deeper problems, much more difficult ones to solve. And if you are actually thinking about that, engaged in solving those problems, then you will find that actually your own problems become less. And, you know, ultimately you can help people in a material way, but only to a limited extent. All our problems are arising out of self-centeredness. So ultimately, the best way to help people is to make them realize this, that their problems are arising out of this self-centeredness, the inability to see interdependent arising, the nature of reality. So the greatest help you can be to others in helping them solve their problems is not through material. I'm not saying don't do material help when you can, please do. But I'm saying the greatest help comes from teaching the Dharma. Whether it's a Buddha Dharma, Krishnaji's Dharma, whoever's, you know, any authentic Dharma. By teaching people that, opening their eyes to it, you are helping them. I don't know if I answered all the questions, but maybe you can take some more and I'll respond.
Yes.
Any hands up?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rajan. We'll take Mr. Dinesh Waghmare. Yes, please.
Are you able to listen to me, sir?
Yes,
Mm.
yes.
Rajan, sir, whatever you said, philosophically, it is perfectly all right. Whether it is a Buddhist philosophy, as right now you said that about Krishna also, it's okay. But when it comes to ideology, how one should act in a particular moment, then the question becomes very tricky. Whatever example you have given, in the case of emergency, that is okay, fine. But normally the situation is not that grave. So what one should do? One has to, my comment is one has to know about his capacities, capabilities, resources and all that, and what he can do, what he can do to others. Means what he is able to do for others, that he should be very clear, his role in the life should be very clear. Then only he will be in a position to help the others. And then only he can be in compassion with the others. Otherwise, whatever the other gentleman said about the suffering, if I don't have the capacity and I help the others, then he will also suffer and I will also suffer. So my suffering will increase. So one has to be very clear about his role in life. That's what I feel. It is really, since it is a question of interconnectedness. So when it is a question of interconnectedness, then one has to be one should be very wise. One should have wisdom. And this wisdom can only give him the right solution or right action in the moment. Otherwise, it is a very tricky question. Whether it can be cultivated or not, you may have the feeling of say sympathy or empathy, but then what one should do in a particular moment, it becomes a tricky question. What do you have to say on this?
Should I respond or we'll take some more questions? A number of hands up.
Okay, we'll take, yes, Prasad, sir.
Sir, I mean, when I see Rajan Sab, I think one sees a compassionate person. So his figure itself speaks of his inner feeling for others. But in the example he has given, he's a friend, Paul, in Germany. He was saying he is very compassionate. I was less compassionate. That is what Mr. Rajan said. But I think Mr. Paul didn't have compassion for his friend Rajan, because Mr. Rajan was a foreign student, a foreigner. He has his own problems, and he would involve him in
in problems with the police because of his concern with for that foreign gentleman. My point is, we cannot generalize who is compassionate, who is not. And sir, the type of action which is possible in a Western country, where there is a less beggary, less poverty, less accidents, is really not possible in a country like India. Because here, every day we find, I find beggars every day on my path, on my route. I mean, it's impossible to be concerned with people who are in need here. You can have at the most only a feeling for everybody. My point is, you cannot really act wherever it is required to act. Because there are so many situations here. There is what is called fatigue of compassion. That is one thing. Second thing, he was saying Buddha was compassionate to humans and non-humans, for all living beings. Krishnaji somehow confined himself to the human lot. I think Krishnaji, I think compassion cannot be restricted to some section at all. Compassion is a feeling which is all encompassing. If you are compassionate to humans, you cannot but be compassionate to your neighborhood, to environment, everything. And so many times Krishnaji has spoken of the seals being killed on such a large scale and all that. And he was, my understanding is that he was a vegetarian, but he made an exception in the case of eggs. Because he said, ultimately, we have to live, we have to survive. So, sir, I don't know. We have to, we can't generalize. Thank you, sir.
Shall I
Thank you,
respond
Prasad.
now?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, to take the easy one first, I certainly didn't mean to say that Krishnaji had no compassion for animals and so on. On the contrary, there's so many stories about his compassionate relationship to animals, birds, etc. I just said in terms of speaking, he spoke of human beings. Okay, he chose not to speak about, whereas the Buddha often speaks about all beings. But that's a minor point. Okay, it doesn't mean that he is not compassionate to others. Now, the other question about which you raised and which was raised just earlier about helping. Yes, I said that, there are three levels. The first level is you actually feel with the other's suffering. That's the first level of compassion. The second level of compassion is the wish, the desire that other person or the other being is freed from suffering. The third level is I will see that this being is freed from suffering. Let's take each level. So when I said my friend Paul was more compassionate at that moment, his state of mind was more compassionate. I was simply saying that he felt for that suffering of that tramp who had fallen down. I didn't feel at that moment. I'm not saying Paul is a more compassionate person than me. Okay. That moment, his state of mind was more attuned to the suffering of that person than mine was. And mine was not attuned to the suffering of that person, or even when I fell, I did feel when he pointed out to me and said, "Hey, Rajan, we can't leave him here." I didn't feel at that moment. Okay. Earlier, I hadn't noticed the chap. But then my self-centered fears, I'm a foreign student and so on, were preventing me from looking. Whereas he was looking. He was also a foreigner in Germany, but he didn't care about his visa being sent home and so on. I was worried about it. Okay, so whatever it was. So the first level is actually feeling. If you don't actually feel the sufferings of others, then compassion just becomes a word. It becomes an intellectual thing. So it is necessary to have that feeling mind. See, when Krishnaji spoke in most of his speeches, he starts with a description of the world. You know, the social, environmental, moral, spiritual crisis of the world. If you read most of his talks or listen to them, you'll see that this is the case. And he's feeling it intensely. Okay, and in some sense, he's exhorting his audience, saying, don't you feel this? Don't you see this? Okay, so the first level is feeling. Second level is a desire that the other person's suffering gets removed. This desire doesn't cost us as yet anything. But do we have it? Or when we see suffering, we turn our eyes away because we want to be comfortable. Do we at least desire that that person's or that being's suffering is removed? The third question is, I will see that the suffering is removed. That statement, when it is made in the Buddhist context, doesn't mean, as I said, that you can immediately solve the sufferings of all beings. If you could, then there would be no suffering left in the world because the Buddha would have solved the suffering of everybody. And sometimes giving material help, if you have the wherewithal, might help temporarily. But the reason why a person gets into suffering in the Buddhist understanding is because of his wrong perception, his wrong behavior. Suffering is brought onto oneself. And there what the Buddhists say when the Mahayana, when they say, I will take on the responsibility of relieving the suffering of all beings, they are not talking about one life. This is the difference between Buddhism and Krishnaji. Krishnaji confined his remarks to this life. Okay, the Buddhists say, lifetime after lifetime, I will devote myself to this till I attain the state of Buddhahood. As a Buddha, my capacity to relieve the suffering of beings will be much greater than it is as an ordinary human being. Therefore, I want to attain Buddhahood for the sake of others. That is the Mahakaruna, which commits you to developing your capacities to help others. Now, somebody else spoke about capacity. We don't have the capacity. See, the Sanskrit word for human being is Purush or Purusha. One of the meanings of Purusha is capacity. And in the understanding of the Buddhists, the more you take on the burden of others, the greater your capacity, the greater your humanness. The full Purush, Mahapurush, is the Buddha. Because he's taken on the burden of relieving the suffering of all beings. So yes, our capacities at the moment are limited. But if we examine the reasons why they're limited, it's because of our self-preoccupation. Something which I've been pointing out, which I think Harshad also spoke about in his intervention. our own self-preoccupation with our petty fears. Then Krishna speaks very often of our own petty fears and this and that and the other. Yeah? So the paradox is that the more you feel for others, the more you at least develop the desire to relieve their sufferings, the more your capacity grows. Capacity is not a static thing. Yeah? It can grow all the time, and that's the purpose of human life, to build your capacities to help others. So we can't relieve the suffering of all the beggars, it's clear. But do we feel their suffering, or do we desire that their suffering ends, or do we dislike them because they are coming into our comfort space, our comfort zone, and reminding us that there is a lot of suffering in the world? If it's a last that we don't like them because they are interfering in our comfort zone, then there's some problem there. But if at least you're willing to look at their suffering, we are able to at least wish deeply that their suffering ends, then that's good enough for the moment. There's no way we can be like Krishnaji. I think all of you know the story about Krishnaji in Vasant Vihar. Beggar came to him and asked for money. He said, I don't have money. Then he did this, saying clothes. Krishnaji went and gave him one of his silk kurtas. That fellow was so surprised and delighted, he went and told all the other beggars in the neighborhood about this. One by one they came. One by one, Krishnaji gave all his kurtas away. Then one more came. He had one left, but it had a tear. So he felt it's not respectful to give a kurta which is torn to a beggar. So he said, I have nothing more. So when the people came back who looked after Krishnaji, they found his wardrobe empty. Okay. So it's possible to live like that. I'm not saying you and I can or should. But what you see there in Krishnaji's action is absolutely no self-centeredness. Okay, in Shanti Deva was a great Buddhist thinker and whatever, adept. There's a beautiful sentence. He says, to think if I give away what I have, what will I have for myself is the way of the devil. Yeah. To think if I keep everything for myself, what will I have to give away is the way of the gods. Okay, these are two different ways of looking at something. And what Krishnaji and I think Buddha both are saying is that cultivate the latter, build the latter. Think if I keep everything for myself, what will I have to give? Not if I give everything, what will I have for myself? Yeah. So shall we take some more questions? A lot of questions.
Yeah, there are lots of hands raised. Yes,
Maybe
Mr. Verma. Mr. Verma,
Yes.
please.
people who have not spoken. Yeah.
Okay, am I audible, sir?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes. I'll just read out a small passage on compassion, which I liked and which I'd like to share. If you think that compassion implies softness, there is no way I can describe compassion to you. Absolutely no way, because compassion can be very hard. Compassion can be very rude. Compassion can hold you. Compassion can roll up its sleeves and operate on you. Compassion is all kinds of things. Compassion can be very soft, but there is no way of knowing that. It's only when you become love, in other words, when you have dropped your illusions and attachments, that you will know. This was the thing. Another, two small questions. The coexistence of compassion and activism in one person, whether they are symbiotically there in that, or whether one is transformed or one is replaced by others, the one feeling, whether compassion is inborn, the compassion and sensitivity, they are inborn,
To me, they appear to be, some are very sensitive and compassionate by nature, right from the very childhood, they are like that. So this is all what my observation is. Thank you very much, Rajan, if you can respond.
Shall we take one or two more and then I'll respond? or-
Yeah, I think so. Yes, Harshad bhai.
Oh, okay. Are you able to hear my voice?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. One thing about the continuous listening, which Rajan talked about, I think that yes, maybe listening someone like Buddha or Krishnamurti or some other spiritual teacher is good when we have not examined our own life, but after listening a little, when we begin to listen to our own self and we begin to listen to all other people, then I think there is no need to keep on reading Krishnamurti or Buddha, because we can begin to see the same thing which Krishnamurti and Buddha were talking about. We can see within ourselves everything, how the thoughts and feelings are coming. And so listening to Krishnamurti for many years and then keep on reading the same thing, I think then we just become very good in idea what Krishnamurti, we can get the knowledge, we can give talks about what Krishnamurti is saying, but real listening is listening to everything, especially to our own mind, how thoughts and feelings are coming. That is one thing. And the other thing, what I would say, that we can help financially or in some other way to people, but to help someone psychologically, it is possible only when a person is free from the psychological suffering. Otherwise, it would be just like giving some talk or advice. As long as we are suffering from our own problems, psychological suffering, desire, fear, anger, then I feel that it is very difficult to help other people to be free from such problems. Okay, so I have finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Harshad bhai. Yes, Mr. Rajendran, please.
Thank you, Rajan sir. Sorry, I am bothering you coming to you again for the second time, because thank you for answering my first question. My second question was not answered. That's why I am troubling you. That is, Krishnaji often said, love, compassion, intelligence, even understanding understanding the truth of what Krishnaji says, that does not belong to oneself. It is outside your brain or body, universal. My question is, how is it cosmic? How one mind is attuned to the state of compassion, love, or intelligence, access them, or how that the compassion comes to oneself when one is attuned, when it is outside our body, or just like Amazon cloud storage, how we are downloading it. One is downloading it. That's all. Thank you, sir.
Rajan, you want to say something, or you want to hear some more people and then?
Maybe here one or two more. There have been some hands raised for a long time. Durga Rani, Shankar.
Yes. So Durga ji, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. I think you all have to excuse me for not, I won't be able to, show my video and all because some other reasons. Yeah, so I just would like to share my views. It's a wonderful talk. I feel more than anything else, the world needs compassion, because that's what we see all the time, the growing, apathy in the societies. And, the things are, I think people are getting more and more self-centered, and this phenomenal changes happening. And it looks like, the world is going more towards the negativity rather than harping upon coming upon the positivity. I feel compassion is a quality. I think should be appreciated and should be remembered. I don't know whether it can be cultivated or not, but as you said, there is no quality which can be at par with compassion and goodness. A person who can reach out to the fellow being, and I think we do come across that kind of people in our societies. They may be like unsung heroes, they may not be looking for their names to come in the newspapers, or they may not be standing on the podiums and giving lectures. They may be doing things, in a very subtle way, because they are born like that. I think that is a very much need of the hour. But anyhow, since we are as human beings, we have the caliber to think and to ponder, to reflect upon all these things. And as we have come across these beautiful teachings and all, I feel if you are referring to Hinduism and Buddhism, they definitely brought out with a lot of moral codes and ethics, so that people will remain bound to certain things. And they're like, you mentioned about elders taking the responsibilities, keeping one's own their own ambitions at bay and taking the responsibility of the families. All these things were the ethics that were being conducted in our societies, that they were praised, and the elders also had seen all those things. But these days, when we look at the society, more and more nuclear families are coming up, and with this information and this technology and all, people are becoming more and more like robots, and it's all about personal gratifications and personal it's all about I, me, myself. I know that kind of a phenomenal changes, things we see in the society. So I feel that's why maybe the Krishnaji was so, emphasized on this quality about seeing the very thing, how the society is happening. And at least he wants to maybe develop some kind of a seed in us to be responsive to all these things. And at least I know it's not easy to just see the things and the changes won't happen in us because our things are so deep rooted in them. So by listening to these things, at least if we start thinking in those lines, if we start reflecting on those lines, and I think and the compassion, all it comes when self-centeredness is not there. The ending of the me, that's what he says. That's a beginning of compassion. That's what Krishna is talking about in those lines. That's the highest levels. But in general also, if we don't have a feeling and feeling for the fellow human, then what kind of a human being you are? So I think the point you raised was, when we are self-absorbed, when you're self-centered, you don't think you don't reach out to other person, even when the person is suffering so much, So I feel that can be an indication, what kind of a human being and what's going to be the future for that person. That may speak about the person. So it's a great talk, and very good to hear the good extracts from Krishnaji's life, either from you or Dubey sir or somebody else also. That's all I want to contribute. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you, Durga ji.
Maybe I'll respond. As I said, too many questions. Yeah, I think Mr. Verma had read that passage about compassion not being something soft. I agree fully with that. You see, compassion has to be tempered with wisdom. So in a particular situation, one has to be able to see what actually will help somebody. So that is important, no doubt about that. It's not sentimentality. It's sharp. Its wisdom is actually sharper than that of others. That's a brief comment. Mr. Rajendran spoke about downloading compassion. I don't know how you download it, but anyway, one way of looking at it is that to be able to be aware of the obstacles to compassion in your own mind. Now, the obstacles to compassion are many. For example, if I am irritated with somebody or I don't like them and so on and so forth, then it's difficult for me to actually be compassionate. In fact, as I said in the beginning of somewhere in the beginning of the talk, that with one's enemies, one actually tends to rejoice when they suffer and not feel any kind of compassion for them. So one has to examine all these things in one's own mind, why they are arising, why I think of somebody as an enemy and another person as a friend. And if you look carefully, we don't have time to go into all that, but if you look carefully, you'll see there's no real basis for that. This characterization or categorization which we are making all the time between enemy, friend, and somebody who's indifferent to us, or we are indifferent to them, is not based on anything solid. So we need to examine this. We also need to examine what we've been talking about earlier, our own preoccupation with ourselves, and see that these are problems. I think I said in one of my earlier talks that Krishnaji often used this analogy of a snake. If I see a cobra, I won't touch it. Nobody needs to tell me, stay away from it. Likewise, we have to see things like jealousy, hatred, anger, desire, lust, whatever you want, arrogance. All these are cobras. It's because we are not seeing that they are cobras that we invite them into our minds. Or when they come into our minds uninvited, we don't drop them. We allow them to dance. So all these cobras are dancing in our mind. If we see that they are cobras, and again I repeat, that is what the Buddhists mean by cultivation, to develop that sharp insight into the nature of these things. When you see them, then nobody needs to tell you, you will drop them. When you drop them, compassion, whether you want to call it cosmic or it comes from within your heart and all those questions, I don't know the answer. It doesn't matter much to me. But when these impediments in your mind, or obstacles or obstructions to compassion in your mind, like anger, jealousy, etc., self-centeredness, when you see them as cobras and you drop them, then compassion will naturally flow. That's my second. And to Durga ji, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, that the world is becoming more and more self-centered, that those values of earlier times are going, etc. And I share your this thing that, if you don't respond to the suffering of others, at least in your mind, as I'm repeating, you may not always be able to help others, but in your mind, you must, feel sad or bad that others are suffering. You must at least wish. You must develop that kind of mind which wishes to end the suffering of all beings. If you don't, what does it mean to call yourself a human? As a human being, Purush, you have that capacity, you have that potential to develop that kind of mind. That is the purpose of your human existence, anybody's human existence, to develop that deeply empathetic mind, that deeply sensitive mind. So we should endeavor. We shouldn't beat ourselves if we are not yet at the level of Krishnaji or Buddha. Okay. We are where we are, but we can move from where we are to some better point. Again, I'm saying we don't beat ourselves at, okay, we are not yet a Krishnaji or we are not yet a Buddha. In the Buddhist understanding of things, these are gradual. Krishnaji's understanding was different. It has become fat in one shot. But that's okay. Otherwise, you see a lot of similarities between them. I'm a gradualist. So I think that I have no quarrel with anyone who says, no, it has to be spontaneous or instantaneous. Position, if it is for you, good. It's not for me. And I've been thinking about these things for a long time. Perhaps my thinking is flawed. But in the Buddhist path, it is gradual. The weight of habit, the weight of negative tendencies. We have entertained jealousy in our mind so many times, even in this life. If you take the narrative about many lives from beginning of time, we've had jealousy in our mind. We had anger in our mind. We've had self-cherishing in our mind. Okay, so these habits are deeply sunk in our minds. They can be, they're not intrinsic to the mind, but they are deeply sunk in our minds. And therefore it will take time, even when you get an insight, for a while, then because of the power of that insight, these habits go. But they reassert themselves. So it takes a long time to be completely free, the way Parekh sir spoke of, free of these, yeah. So I think I answered the questions. There's one written question, or maybe Shankar would like to raise it. He's
No,
gone.
it's time as per our rules. I think we have to close by 12:30. If
Okay,
you still
sorry.
have time, I'll talk.
I've read your question. If you want a quick response.
No, my question is, what is wrong in anger? I got anger just because the society has named it as anger, and society has said anger is wrong, jealousy is wrong, selfishness is wrong. But what exactly is the wrong in anger? In anger, what is happening inside me is some sensations are taking place and some thoughts are happening, and they also will die after some time. So why we are so much worried about this anger, selfishness?
Two reasons, quick response, two reasons.
Yeah.
One is that when you're angry, you say they'll die after some time, but in that period of time, your way of seeing things is completely wrong. Okay, you yourself will realize it when the anger goes. The way you were seeing the person was completely biased and one-sided and mistaken. And unfortunately, you may say or do something in that brief period of time when the anger goes, which harms the other person. So that's one reason. Two is, even if you don't actually physically or verbally harm somebody, that habit of anger will, that incident of anger will leave a seed in your mind. Every time you get angry, the seed of anger is strengthened in your mind. You find people who get angry at the smallest thing. We call them short-tempered, or people who lack patience. Now, the reason for this is the repeated indulgence in the mind of anger. So even if you don't act on it verbally or physically, that anger prevailing in your mind will shape your mind.
But when I'm not in anger also, I'm not seeing things as they are.
Well, you're not seeing things as they are, maybe because you have other things in your mind, jealousy, desire. Whenever we have any of these, what Buddhists call kleshas in your mind, you're seeing things in a distorted way. Yeah. But anger is one of the most powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's why it's better to be not only without, it's not because other people are saying anger is bad and so on. That's not the reason for dropping it. You have to see for yourself, again, the analogy of the cobra. This anger is destroying not the other person, it's destroying my mind, my peace, my ability to look, my ability to grow. Likewise, jealousy, it's eating me up. It's not harming the other person, but it's just kind of not letting me sit or sleep. Okay, when you see that clearly, then you say, what's the point of being jealous? Okay, my wife or girlfriend likes it, so.
Thank you.
C'est la vie, as they say in French. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajan, for such a beautiful discourse.
Yeah.
And I'll announce a few things. Coming Thursday, we have a book reading by Dr. Pradeep Verma. It's a book by Rohit Mehta, J. Krishmurti and the Nameless Experience. So Verma Saab will read it and then it will be followed by his own comments and our discussion on that. And next Sunday, we'll have Mr. Murli Menon. He is associated with the Valley School, Bangalore. He will be talking to us on transformation and mutation. That will be at 11 o'clock. And the coming Thursday at 6 p.m. So if you're free, please do join us. And before I close, thank you, Rajan, once again. It was very, very, I mean, there are lots of food for thought. And maybe in near future or sometimes in future, we'll again request you to come and talk to
Okay.
people again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. So
thank
much.
you. I always learn a lot in these discussions with all of you.
All of
Thank
us.
you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.